communicated with a member of the opposite sex knows that there can be major differences in the way men and women communicate. The stereotype follows that men get bored by women rambling on, and that women get frustrated by men not saying much at all. Deborah Tannen looked at this notion and decided to study it in depth. From her research, she developed her theory of genderlect styles, a theory that could be the key to explaining just what it is that is different in the way that men and women communicate.
Well, I gotta admit, I definitely agree with Tannen's theory on how men and women definitely have this different perspective from which they speak. Men being a little bit more problem-solve-ish, and women definitely seeking that relationship. I'm pretty sure that's accurate.
In her theory, Deborah Tannen basically states that communication styles can be influenced by one's gender. She explains how, when communicating, women desire connection, that is, intimacy, while men tend to desire a reassurance of their status, that is, power. While Tannen does acknowledge that, in certain instances, women can desire power and men can desire intimacy, she still primarily promotes the idea of women seeking intimacy and men seeking power.
I would say that it is stereotypical, but like all stereotypes, there are truth to it. The fact that even though, like the women I know in my life tend to be more feely and tend to be more talkative, and the men I know in my life will tend to be more, all right, here's the point, this is what I'm gonna say, why make it longer, let's just stop there. But I do know plenty of guys that are more feely, and I also know plenty of girls that are just like, all right, here's the point, end of story, let's move on. And that just kind of is more depending on personality and also depending on the group or the area that you're around.
I think I can see where Tannen is coming from, but largely I think I disagree because it seems like this theory sort of seems to place that report talk and desire for power. Those seem to be things that are more shallow and sort of inherently bad, and so to ascribe that to men kind of makes it feel like she's saying that inherently men are more shallow in their conversation, which I would disagree with. I do understand also though, and agree with the whole thing where oftentimes I have seen women more interested in venting and just at least getting it off their chest, which is something I find helpful too, but then also I have been guilty of just trying to solve problems when people want to vent, and so that's one thing I would agree with.
Tannen's theory of genderlect styles also states that women tend to value what is called rapport talk, while men tend to value what is called report talk. What this means is that women value talk that aims to create conversation and build relationships, while men value talk that aims to either assert themselves, draw attention to themselves, or solve a problem.
So at the root of it, I do agree with Tannen's idea that there are these different cultures, these different generalizations for men and for women in communication. I agree with that general core fundamental idea. However, I like to think of it more on a spectrum, where generally speaking you see these greater trends toward one end or the other, but people can fall along the spectrum, and that helps in bridging that cultural gap, that communication gap between the different styles as well. So I think you can train yourself to fall at different places along this spectrum, or you can just be born one way or the other. I think it's a combination of that.
According to Tannen, this issue of report talk versus rapport talk appears in 6 different speech forms: private versus public speaking, telling a story, listening, asking questions, conflict, and nonverbal communication.
That works well.
I
really liked Olivia's idea about communication between genders being like a spectrum, because of the fact that I've met so many people in my life who don't ever fall into the general gist of I'm a problem solver, or I just need to, talk about my feelings and have no one try to fix me at all. And I think really a huge thing that comes down to that whole spectrum idea is how people were raised. And if you were raised in such a way where you had to take charge and fix the problems or else they were never going to get fixed, you're going to start reflecting that in your communication. Or if your life is pretty good and you just need to get it out emotionally wise and then be done with it because it's not actually a terribly huge problem that needs to be fixed, then you're going to fall to more what people describe as the feminine side of communication.
Tannen explains that these differences in communication likely occur as a result of men and women growing up in different speech communities. In other words, women and men grow up with different expectations for communication set upon them, thus affecting the way they learn to communicate.
But it's really just basically boiled down to who was raised in what way and what they value in their own ideals, because that's really what will be reflected in communication. Because communication is what we use to state our own feelings, our own thoughts, and what we expect from the world and what we want to see in the world.
An important aspect to note with this theory is that bridging the gap in the way the two genders communicate is not impossible. In fact, Tannen is adamant that this gap is similar to a cultural gap that can be bridged if men and women learn how to speak each other's genderlect, in other words, their gender dialect. This helps to improve their communication overall.
Well, I do also agree with her concepts that men and women can learn each other's style of talking and different gender language, I think she called it. And with that, in my personal experience, I've met guys who are both problem-solvish and relationship, and I've also met women who are both relationship and problem-solve. So in general, when a friend of mine comes to me and they just want to vent about something, which a lot of people seem to want to do, and I've never really understood why. But when they do, I'm like, "Are you venting?" And they go, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Okay, great. I know." Then that's a mental note to myself to, "Hey, problem solver, be quiet and just listen." And that's one way that guys and girls can both learn to talk to one another. And as long as the establishment of the type of conversation, problem solve, or relation is established first, it can really help a lot with saving those relationships.
I don't know. I feel like I agree with parts of it because I think I see them more as pattern, and I don't think the theory says that everything, everyone speaks that way, but I can see it as a pattern that occurs often, but it's not always true. Because I know I personally, sometimes when I'm listening to someone vent, I want to help solve the problem. Because I want to help them, and I figure that's helping them more than just listening, although I know with certain people I've learned definitely they need to just vent. But in general, yeah, I think that's my perspective on that.
In all, the Genderlect Styles of Deborah Tannen set the stage for a great way of looking at communication in male-female relationships of any kind, partially because it seems to look at this issue in a way that is realistic, applicable, and logical. Even if this theory cannot solve all of the problems in male-female communication, it can help each gender to understand the mindset of the other person a little bit more. This helps them see things from the perspective of the other, which can help to clear up frustration, assumptions, and miscommunication. Overall, the Genderlect Styles of Deborah Tannen can help to bridge the male-female linguistic difference.